Holy City Center Radio is episode 133, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Friday, June 9th, 2023. Hello, all you saints and sinners out there in the Holy City. Hope you are doing well. Hope you had an incredible week. I hope that the rain didn't ruin too many of your plans or put a damper, see what it did there, on anything you wanted to do. I'm not sure. I'm terrible at looking at the weather for the most part. Uh, you know, I'm not a huge outdoorsy guy, so if it rains, I'm like, hey, whatever. I got plenty I can do inside. So I don't know what today's weather, today being Friday, what it's supposed to be, but hopefully the rain does go away. It just feels better when it's a little bright and sunny out there, right? But putting all that aside, my week was pretty good, somewhat uneventful. Didn't have any plans or anything crazy to really share. So, without any further ado, we're just gonna go ahead and get into the news because there is plenty to talk about. All right, first up, you may have not have heard of this, especially because when this occurred, Mr. Alec Murdoch was in Charleston for his latest hearing. You may remember regarding the new charges about federal crimes. They actually did that here in Charleston, in the city of Charleston, rather downtown. Near the Four Corners of Law. There was another pretty big case that was going on and kind of got lost in the shuffle. This has to do with what are called forever chemicals. So there is a potentially landmark environmental trial that was scheduled to begin in the federal court in downtown Charleston back on June 5th, but has been postponed to give attorneys time to discuss a possible settlement, so it may not have to go to like an actual jury trial. Lawyers for the 3M company in a small city in Florida requested the delay on Sunday, saying they were making pretty significant progress toward an actual resolution, and it would be more productive for them to try to finalize that agreement rather than go to the jury trial, which was scheduled to start. The two sides have been working with a court-appointed outside mediator since October, and it appears that they're getting closer to some sort of deal. So, U.S. District Court Judge Richard Gergel approved the indefinite delay on Monday, shortly before jury selection was actually set to begin. He did ask for weekly updates with a final report due in the next 21 days. So obviously this is from earlier this week, so a little bit less than that now. He will reschedule the case for a trial and won't delay it further unless a settlement is actually reached. The litigation, for those wondering, centers on this class of man-made and nearly indestructible chemicals that have been linked to cancer and other health ailments after seeping into drinking water systems across the U.S. and beyond. One of the primary manufacturers was 3M, who I mentioned before. For decades, this Minnesota-based industrial company, DuPont and others, have made or sold the water, stain, and heat-resistant chemicals for use in assortment of products, including things like Teflon-coated cookware to carefree carpeting. They contain this chemical, which I'm not going to try to pronounce, and thankfully, I think many of you have heard this term of PFAS, which is PFAS, which signals these so-called forever chemicals. Those chemicals, in addition to the products I mentioned before, they're actually a key ingredient in a widely used suppressant that firefighters spray on the ground and had been doing so for decades. More than 4,000 lawsuits from around the nation have since been consolidated to take place at the court center downtown, the Judicial Center at Meeting and Broad Streets here in Charleston. Most of these lawsuits allege that the chemicals infiltrated the soil and contaminated public and private drinking water sources. A complaint filed by a small beach community in Florida, it's a town called Stewart, was selected as the first case to go to trial in Charleston. The city of about 18,000 residents is seeking around $115 million to pay for several public water projects. On Friday, last Friday, that is, not today, three other defendants, including DuPont, agreed to settle the South Carolina litigation by paying nearly $1.19 billion with a B dollars into a compensation fund. They still, however, face similar lawsuits elsewhere. So really interesting that because there were so many lawsuits around the nation that they're consolidating and having it here in Charleston, which is interesting. There was a potential for the trial to start. Obviously, as you just heard, that is not going to happen, but there could be a big settlement coming. Um, if you haven't looked into these chemicals before and some of the history of them, number one, you can click the link in the show notes to learn more, or just look up PFAS chemicals. You can learn a little bit more. But yeah, this is a very significant trial that, as you can see, could lead to lots and lots of money being distributed to communities around the country. We talked a lot about on this show. I don't know why I always say we, it's me. You listened, and thank you so much for doing so. Talked about a lot on this podcast over the couple years that we've been doing this. Obviously, about legislation and big things that are going on around the state and city. And because of that legislation talk, it centers a lot around gun control or lack thereof and abortion laws, because that's been such a big focus of our legislation. So, oftentimes you, like myself, are probably wondering, like, man, it really seems like this legislature is passing laws that really the majority of people don't agree with here in the state. And then I kind of think to myself, well, you know what? Although I don't block a lot of people on social media for my Holy City Sinner account because, number one, I don't want to let people get to me too much. Number two, Twitter has some filters. I don't see a lot of the trolly people. It's not super helpful, even though I do sometimes get into arguments and such. But I do like to see, as much as I may disagree on some topics, I do like to see what other people are saying. And so even though I'm not like in a complete bubble, I sometimes wonder, well, maybe I'm in some kind of bubble because my friends are all people who think, at least politically, they think similarly. I can't even say it. They have similar thoughts to me. We're kind of in agreement on a lot of these things. So I just sort of assume, like, well, maybe, hey, I'm mistaken. I'm in a very red state. I guess I shouldn't be surprised. Well, there was granted, not the most scientific or expansive, polling that was done that suggests that, hey, maybe I'm not in a bubble. And the majority of South Carolinians actually do sort of side with me, at least in some capacity, on these issues. And it makes it even more frustrating to see these results and know that there's a group of legislators who are either just forcing their own personal beliefs into these laws and ignoring what their constituents want, or they're just very, as we like to say, like way too much online and way too much into culture wars and things, and way too much paying attention to national politics, and are just trying to do what they think their party would want in the grand scheme of things. So yes, this poll suggests, at least, that the legislation here in South Carolina is out of sync with what many of the residents actually want, specifically in regards to abortion and gun regulation. So let's get into this opinion poll. So we all know that 6-week abortion ban was recently signed into law again, and then was immediately blocked by a state judge. It's going to go to the South Carolina Supreme Court again. But over 40% of South Carolinians say they're opposed to that 6-week abortion ban, with a majority of respondents in support of allowing exceptions for rape, the life of the mother, or fatal fetal anomaly. When it comes to guns, 75% of the respondents to this Winthrop poll say that only persons 21 years or older should be allowed to purchase a firearm. And many people support other gun regulation measures related to background checks and the sale of high capacity magazines. So let's dive in a little bit deeper. On abortion specifically, it was 43% of respondents said that they oppose the 6-week abortion ban, with just 37% in favor. So obviously, it's not a majority in the sense of over 50%. But based on the polling, the highest percentage, no one hit 50 because there's other options in the poll as well, undecided or things like that. So there's 20% that's still out there that didn't specifically fit into 100% opposed to the abortion ban or 100% in favor. But the highest percentage that reached in that category was 43%, meaning the majority of people that they polled did not want this 6-week abortion ban. By the way, the poll, like I said, I'm sure it's done as well as it can, but it can only reach so far, and we know how polls can be sometimes. It only accounted for 1,051 South Carolina adults that were polled back in May. So I know it's not a huge sample size, but you wouldn't think it would waver too much. And now, all right, getting back to the numbers, not surprisingly, when you break it down by political affiliation, there's some big changes. 52% of Republicans said they support the ban, no surprise there, while 57% of Democrats say they oppose it. Again, not that big of a surprise. I'm actually a little surprised there's not more Democrats that oppose it. But again, when you're in such a red state, sometimes you find Democrats that aren't as left leaning as the rest of the country, and sometimes, kind of bleed over into the center. And to be fair, some Republicans in the state do the same. Now, getting back to the gun legislation, 81% of Democrats and 73% of Republicans in the poll say they are in favor of legislation that would require a completed background check before a buyer can take possession of a gun, even if that background check takes longer than 3 days. So that's a pretty significant number. 81% of Democrats, no surprise, but that 73% of Republicans shows, and this is something that we've been talking about, and you probably see online. You a lot of the talk is, oh, Republicans, they don't care, they just want guns everywhere. Well, yeah, maybe the politicians, the actual politicians, are saying things like that and refuse to make any changes. But when you actually talk to people in the communities who identify as Republican, 73% want this background check issue to be fixed. That's common sense. It's not infringing on anyone's rights. They may have to wait a couple of days longer. That's all that means. And again, 73% of Republicans, that is significant. Now, why are we talking about this background checks and this delay? So, South Carolina is one of 28 states that continue to allow guns to be sold to people whose federal background check have not been completed after 3 days. This has become known as the Charleston loophole. It was named after the mass shooting that took place at Charleston's Emmanuel AME Church back in 2015, because it was carried out by a gunman who fell through the background check loophole. His background check did not come back in 3 days, so it was automatically approved for him to buy a gun. Turns out later he should not have been allowed to purchase it, at least not. In that 3 day period, there may have been some longer waits, or he may not have been able to purchase it at all. And because of that loophole, he was able to get the gun that he then used in that horrific murder. Now, more than half of South Carolinians want to ban, the sale of high capacity gun magazines. 47% of Republicans, in fact, support such a ban, compared to 73% of Democrats. So again, this poll is showing that, yeah, there's still, some divide between the parties, especially on abortion. But when you take party out of it, just look at everybody, and there may be some people who don't identify as a particular, political party as well. So when you take the entirety of this poll, it's suggesting that a lot of the laws regarding, or the push for laws regarding abortion, the abortion ban, and then either a lack of movement or the expanding of gun rights in the state is not in line with what the people actually want. Like I said, on one hand, it's like I knew that some of these things, there's got to be a higher percentage of people who agree with me. It feels like there is. So why are these legislators passing these laws that either the majority, and again, it might not be a true majority as far as 50% or higher, because some people are undecided in things, but the highest percentage that they do get to seem to support common sense gun legislation and oppose the abortion ban at 6 weeks. Again, that doesn't mean that, if a 12-week one was proposed, that might swing it. But what we do know is at the 6 week mark, from this poll, the people in the state do not want it. It's extremely frustrating. I don't know how to fix something like that. I don't, obviously it's a whole vote, get out there. We got to, try to vote more people that align with our beliefs, but it seems like it's more than that, because people are being voted in largely probably because of the R next to their name, and people aren't willing to vote against them, even if they don't agree. Like, well, I didn't really want that 6 week abortion ban, but a Republican beats a Democrat, so we're just going to deal with it. There's a lot of that too. So I don't know how to really fix that, because a lot of people will vote against their best interests, or will vote against, or at least will vote for someone who they pretty much agree with, but maybe on some of these key issues are like, well, I don't really agree, but I agree with them with everything else. So it's a hard thing to to convince someone when they've been told through family, friends, TV, internet, whatever, social media, whatever it may be in their bubbles that no, you can't vote for a Democrat no matter what you do. You can't. They are evil. They're terror. You've seen all this stuff online. So I'm not sure how to fix that, but so it does add that extreme level of frustration when you see these numbers like, okay, both parties actually, as far as the actual people, not the politicians that are making the decisions, but the actual people who live in these communities are a lot closer than we think we are in a lot of these issues. And it's just so frustrating to see that despite, and again, I know the poll is only 1,000 people, but that's how polls work. And it was done by Winthrop. They do lots of these polls here in the state about these topics, and they have a pretty good reputation. So yeah, it is just so frustrating. I'm not sure what the solution is. I just wish more people who maybe their legislators assume agree with them would be more vocal about these issues that they don't agree with. And we did see that with the abortion ban. We saw Republicans, whether it was politicians or people in the communities that identified as Republicans, saying, no, this isn't right. This 6-week ban is not okay. I guess we just have to hope that legislators will start listening, and the people who vote based on party will call out their own on something that they don't agree with, and don't just say, "Well, I'm not going to say anything because I don't want people to think I support the other side." Just politics, man. It it's so frustrating, and it seems to get worse. But at least we know now that we are closer on a lot of these issues than we thought, and we have the power. We just have to make sure we exercise that power more appropriately. The Charleston County School District is facing a new lawsuit after a parent says her kindergartner was punched, harassed, and sexually assaulted by another student for months with little to no prevention efforts from school officials. The lawsuit filed in Charleston County on Monday states between September and November of 2022, another kindergartner inappropriately touched, the plaintiff's son about 10 times at Mary Ford Elementary School. In December, the documents go on to state that the mother requested her son to be moved to a different classroom, but that request was apparently denied for whatever reason. The kindergartner was also allegedly kissed by this other child multiple times in a physical education class in November of 2022. From there, the suit also alleges that the student cut her son's hair, punched him, and grabbed his genitals on several different occasions. The parent alleges her son's teachers and aides saw all this, didn't do enough to prevent the incidents from continuing to happen. She also states that after her son, especially after the touching inappropriately, they decided to bring their son to be analyzed by a psychologist, just to, obviously this could be very detrimental to a child if these things indeed happen. A day later, the lawsuit states that her son had been punched in the stomach. Court documents say that she again requested a classroom change for her son, and it was again denied. So, if this is all true, and this is a lawsuit, so who knows? It's got to go to court and all this. This is horrible, and it's awful that this happened to this poor child. And at the absolute least, the school should have allowed that child to be moved to another classroom. And I do not understand what the reasoning may have been for not doing so. Part of that reasoning, of course, is we don't hear from the Charleston County School District. We have to keep that in mind. When they were asked for comment, a spokesperson said that at this time, their legal counsel is still waiting to receive the suit. So I guess they hadn't actually received it. They're just hearing about it. But once they do, the lawsuit will be reviewed, and they will determine if they have anything to add. So they just basically weren't ready to comment until they can see the lawsuit. So again, it's all alleged. It's a lawsuit that's out there, just to be aware of it. Who knows how true it is, or what parts may be inaccurate, or if it all is true. And it's something to keep an eye on as it makes its way potentially to a court case. Nearly a dozen churches across the Low Country are set to sort of close later this month over a disagreement they have with the stated doctrine of the United Methodist Church. This comes after about 1,500 members of the 2023 South Carolina Annual Conference widely approved of the closure of 113 churches statewide after voting to separate from the United Methodist Church. This happened back on Tuesday. The churches determined that they could no longer function as a UMC branch because of their beliefs that the denomination has not upheld its stated doctrine on the issues of human sexuality. That doctrine apparently states that it should be the churches should be prohibited from performing same gender weddings and the ordination of what they call self-avowed practicing homosexuals. Church leaders tell News 2 that while these churches will depart after the UMC affiliation is all done, they will not be like closing, like their doors 100%. The properties are going to be transferred to independent church entities, which were created in order to allow them to separate. So they're not going to be 100% closed. They may not have services or the same programs for a little bit, but they will reopen. So all that is to say, basically, there's a group of churches that want to remove their affiliation from the United Methodist Church. Basically, I mean, bottom line, they're bigots. They believe that their church doctrine, they should not be performing same-sex weddings and basically should not be approving of any LGBTQ folks. So that's really what's going on here is these churches are moving away because they have these beliefs about that community. And you know, you see this a lot online where people are like, well, I'm not a bigot and I don't care what people do, but my beliefs, my religious beliefs, people always want to give scripture when they want to explain why they are oppressing a group or disapproving of a group, or basically they're trying to hide behind their bigotry or hatred or whatever. Be like, well, religion. So, and a lot of times they're misquoting or overlooking another piece of scripture that would negate part of what they are saying. It's sad to see that this many churches believe that strongly, that they want to just completely remove themselves under this banner of this, higher or this bigger entity. It's really sad to see that's happening in our community. And I hope some people who maybe have been going to those churches, when they hear this, they decide to leave because that's not in line with their beliefs. I don't know many religions that openly tell you to oppress people, to pass laws against a certain group of people, to be bigoted towards them. Again, just tired of people hiding behind and misusing scripture to explain away their bigotry. And finally, I try to end on some fun news or something different, something a little wacky, something just to nice little palate cleanser, especially as we go into the weekend. So here you go. There's something new that is currently drawing diners to Taco Boy in downtown Charleston. And no, it's not some awesome new dish or, some new cocktail that people are going wild over. It's actually a plant, specifically a succulent known as a century plant that has been named Delilah by the Taco Boy staff. And right now, this plant is currently undergoing a very rare bloom. I didn't know anything about century plants, but this is really fascinating to me. These plants can take 10 to 30 years to bloom after being planted and will do so only once in its lifetime. It starts out as a small, like asparagus looking shoot sticking out of the middle of the plant, but then quickly can grow upwards of 30 feet. And right now, Delilah, the century plant at the Taco Boy in downtown Charleston, is blooming, and it's currently been measured to be at about 24 feet tall. It's pretty. I've only seen it in pictures, and it's pretty imposing seeing it there. I haven't seen it in person. It must be even crazier to see, and I definitely need to make it over there. So I said before, the plant can take 10 to 30 years to bloom. This specific plant was first planted back in 2009, so it's been there for a while, and here we are, 2023. It has finally started to bloom. Now, there is a downside to the blooming of a century plant. It typically means that the plant is ending, it's towards the end of its life cycle. And although that this succulent will die shortly after the bloom, we don't really know when, of course, but eventually, because of this part of its life cycle, when this happens, it will be gone. However, on the plus side, it has already produced smaller offspring, which are called pups, believe it or not. And one of those will eventually grow and replace Delilah, according to Taco Boy. So they have to wait a long, long time. As I said, another 10 to 30 years before the next century plant will bloom. So if you have a chance, head over to Taco Boy and give it a look. It's pretty, like I said, I knew nothing about it, so I find it fascinating, and it's pretty interesting to see these pictures. And I think seeing it in person would be pretty special. So, I'm gonna have to get over there pretty soon, and I'll let you know if I do. Told you we had a lot to get to today, a little bit longer episode than the last few, but hopefully you didn't mind. Get you going into the weekend. Now you know what's going on in town and around the state. You can talk about the century plant with your friends and regale them with how much you know about them. But then after, make sure you tell them to subscribe to Holy City Center Radio. And in fact, if you haven't already, please do that yourself, as well as rate and review the podcast. You can also help out by going to patreon.com/holycitysinner or going to holycitysinner.com/shop to pick up some merchandise. I want to thank Cole Collins with LMC Sound System for producing each and every episode of Holy City Center Radio, and also Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in each episode as well. Stay safe out there this weekend. I hope you have an amazing time. I will be back with you on Monday. Until then, good night and good luck.